Good morning, everyone, respected teacher, and my dear friends. Today I'm going to present a seminar on the topic National Policy on Education 1986 and its review committees. So, basically, what is this policy? This policy was considered one of the most important and comprehensive reforms in the field of education in the post independence India. It was introduced during the leadership of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, and it aimed to make education a powerful instrument for social change and national development. So now let's move on to the next slide, and that's the intro slide to get a basic idea about the national policy of education in India in 1986. So basically, the National Policy on Education, often called NPE 1986, was designed to ensure that every citizen of India, no matter whether caste or class or gender, could access quality education. Okay, and the very first national education policy came in 1968 based on the Kothari Commission. Based on the Kothari Commission report, which was in the year of 1964 to 66. However, by the mid 1980s, India was undergoing a rapid social and a lot of technological transformation. So the new policy was necessary, to make education more relevant to modern times. So the NPE 1986 emphasized four important things, and those were access, equality, quality, and the relevance of education. It also recognized education as a fundamental human right. So education was so important that was considered as a fundamental human right. So now let's look at the next slide. That's the historical background of NPE 1986. So the first national policy on education came in 1968 based on what? The Kothari Commission. Based on the Kothari Commission, the national policy on education, the first national policy on education came in 1968. And then by the mid 1980s, India faced a lot of social and technological transformation. So a lot of technological and social transformation. Then the NPE 1986 responded to these changes. So the first national policy on education that came in 1968 did not, demand to the technological transformation that was happening in the country. But then a new education policy, that is the NPE 1986, responded to these changes, okay, these social and technological transformation by ensuring that the education reached every child regardless of their caste, class or gender. So NPE 1986 did not show any sort of, discrimination to any student or an individual. So, and it also recognized education as a fundamental human right. It also recognized education as a fundamental human right that was important for all individuals. So now let's move on to the next slide, and that is the major objectives of NPE 1986. So the major objectives of NEP 1986 were: first one, the universalization of elementary education is a UEE, which means making elementary education totally free and compulsory for all the children up to the 14 years of age. Next, reducing illiteracy among adults and children. Okay, and then improving the quality and relevance of education so that it connects with real life. So the education curriculum has to be so much, improvised so that matches and connects with the real life. Okay, and then promoting equality in education by removing discrimination. So basically it removes, NPE 1986 remove any sort of discrimination, okay, based on caste, class, gender or anything. Then strengthening teacher education and training to get professional teachers as. So now let's move on to the next topic. That's the core principles of NPE 1986. So basically, the policy was based on five main principles. The first one, education for all, ensuring. So it ensured the NPE 1986 ensured that everyone was so accessible to education. So it ensured access to education for every citizen. Next, equal educational opportunities, removing any sort of disparities for women, SC, ST, that's the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and all the. Next one, decentralized management. That means involving even local communities in running and managing all the schools, involving all these local communities. Okay, when the society could take a part in this, management, school management, to improvise the learning and teaching process. Now let's move on to the next slide, that is the structural reforms introduced under the NPE 1986. So basically NPE 1986 brought several structural reforms, and it strengthened the 10 plus 2 plus 3 system, meaning 10 years of schooling, 2 years of secondary education, and 3 years of college. And then it introduced ECEE, which actually stands for Early Childhood Care and Education, and it focused on the development of. So now let's look at the key initiatives of the NP 1986. So some of the major programs and initiatives were launched under this policy. The first one is Operation Blackboard. It was used to improve primary school infrastructure by providing what proper classrooms, blackboards, and trained teachers for improvising the teaching learning process. Next one was Navodaya Vidyalayas. So basically, they were residential schools for talented students from rural areas of. So now next we move on to the education for equality, what it actually means. Because NP 1986 came, and basically it means that NP 1986 actually gave special importance to all education for equality, and it aimed to remove all those gender and social inequalities that were prevalent in the society. It also made women's education a central focus. Also expressed how much education was so important in everyone's life, in women's lives. Okay, in women's lives, and introduced scholarships, hostel facilities, and support programs for all the scheduled castes. Now let's move on to the next slide, that is vocationalization and skill development. So basically, this policy promoted vocational education. That means including job-related and practical skill training in secondary and higher secondary schools. And this was basically to bridge between education and employment and to develop all those entrepreneurial and technical skills instead of just focusing on those white collar jobs. So now we move on to the next one, that's teacher education and professional development. So basically, teachers were described as the backbone of the education system. Is it? It's true, right? Teachers are always considered as the backbone of the education system. And the NPE 1986 created institutions like DITES, that's the District Institutes of Education and Training for Teacher Education, and all those refresher trainees. It also promoted the continuous, professional development to workshops and refresher courses. So teachers would be so up to, So now let's move on to the next one, that is the review committees. I'm sorry, the higher education and research. So basically here at the higher level, the policy focused on excellence, autonomy, and accountability. And it also encouraged universities to promote research and all those innovations to to offer interdisciplinary education, because why, where students could study across different fields. And also this policy also supported creating centers of excellence in. So now let's move on to the review committees of National Policy of Education of 1986. So basically, after the implementation, the government of India realized that education needs to, keep evolving. Okay, so two major committees were set up to review and update the policy. The first one was the Ramamurthy Committee in 1990 and the CABE Committee in 1992. So basically, their purpose was to examine how well the policy was working and what improved. So now first, let's move on to the Ramamurthy Committee. So the Ramamurthy Committee was headed by Dr. Acharya Ramamurthy, and its main goal was to review about how NPE 1986 was being implemented. Okay, how it was undergoing, and to recommend changes based on all the social, political, and economic developments that was happening in the country. Now let's look at the major recommendations of Ramamurthy Committee. So first of all, this committee made several important recommendations. First, the decentralization of community participation, meaning local communities should have more control in education field and the process and all this teaching learning process in schools. Next, autonomy for educational institution, so that school and colleges can innovate and make decisions so freely. Okay, to update the students with proper education and also become the teaching learning process becomes so much updated. So now let's look at the CAP committee. So basically, the CAP committee of 1992, actually it stands for what, Central Advisory Board of Educational Committee, was chaired by Sri Arjun Singh, who was then the Minister of Human Resource Development. And its purpose was to review and revise the national policy on education 1986 based on those Ramamurthy Committee findings and make it more practical and provide an inclusive education. Now let's look at the major recommendations of CAP committee. So the major recommendations of CAP committee were the following. So emphasis on value education to so that to teach moral, spiritual and cultural values, and also education for equality, meaning ensuring that women, SCs and STs and minorities have equal access to education, no discrimination or anything. Next one, everything is like so fair. Next one, education, or I mean, sorry, the introduction of environmental education, that is to create ecological awareness, that is basically how to protect the nature, our ecology, the ecosystem, environment, and all that. Next one, encouragement of work experience and vocational education. So that work experience will make the students and children so capable for jobs. Okay, and women and SCs and ST and all would have so much access to work experience that they would be like so much capable for jobs and other things. Then I also that is only vocational education. Okay, so provide everyone with recommendations into practice. So now let's look at the program of action, that is the POA of 1992. So basically, the program of action of POA 1992 was created, to improvise or to implement the revised recommendations and introduce the district primary education program for DPEP to improve elementary education, strengthen adult and non-formal education, expanded Navodaya Vidyalayas, and also focus on teacher accountability and equality. So basically, the combined efforts of the Ramanurthy and CAP committee shaped India's education planning throughout the 1986. Understood? And then the policy was used, it was refined to a more human-centered, inclusive and development approach to education. Now next, let's look forward to the impact of NP in 1986. So basically, the impact of this policy was huge, and literacy rates, especially among there's women and rural areas, increased, education infrastructure improved, and then distance learning expanded through IGNOU, that is Indira Gandhi National Open University, and then digital. So I hope NPE 1986 is totally clear for you. So now let's just conclude the topic. So to conclude, the National Policy on Education 1986 actually marked a turning point in Indian education because it focused on universalization, equality, and the quality of education. And the main two committees, the Ramamurthy and CAP committee, had reviewed and refined it, ensuring that education remains so relevant and inclusive, and its legacy continues even today through policies like the NEP 2020. So that's it. Thank you. I hope NPA 1986 is clear for you. Now to make the session more interactive, let's have a short MCQ session. So now the first question, the National Policy on Education was 1986 was introduced under the leadership of whom? The answer is option B. Rajiv Gandhi. Next one. Which program was launched to improve primary school infrastructure? The answer is Operation Blackboard. Now let's move on to the next question. That is the NPE 1986. Emphasize education as an instrument of what? Answer is social change. Next question. Which organization was formed to regulate teacher education? Answer is NCTE. Next question. Which committee reviewed NPE 1986 and 1990? Answer is Ramamurthy Committee. Option B, Ramamurthy Committee. Next question. Which sexual society received special focus under NPE 1986? Answer is B. It's an assertion reason sort of question. The NPE 1986 introduced Navodaya Vidyalayas for talented rural children. Reason: to provide equal opportunities to gifted or rural students. Answer is both A and R are true, and R is the correct explanation. Next question. NPE 1986 neglected women's education. Reason: focused only on technical education. Answer is both A and R. But it's completely false, right? Because women's education was so much taken into consideration, but also focused on technical education.